And we are live. Welcome everybody to Lubbock Compact Live for Wednesday, July the 26th. This will be our last one for the month, and actually our last one until we come back on August 9th. So got lots of good information for you on here. As usual, if you have questions, please put them down in the comment. Hey, Kim, put those down in the comments and we will see them and we will answer them right on the air. And so don't hesitate to do that. As usual, I'm your host, Adam Hernandez, here with my co-host, Josh Shankles. And this is Lubbock Compact Live. We got city updates for the day, Josh. So you are the master of ceremonies this evening. And so let's go ahead and kick it off.
I got you all locked and loaded here. So thanks to our guests for letting us take a few breaks. We've had a couple of pieces during this summer where we've taken some weeks off. We're going to take at least one more. Summer's a time when everything slows down. That is definitely reflected in our city agendas and kind of how much business is being conducted. 2 city council meetings this month, both of them pretty short and sweet. Not a whole lot to really dig up to the surface and put in front of our viewers, but we've got a few things here that are longtime advocacy efforts, things that we always like to bring up and are evergreen for us. And so let's get right into it. We had one city council meeting on the 11th of this month, and again, not a whole lot going on here. A couple of things that I thought were interesting or maybe to highlight for folks is annually, at least twice that I'm aware of, maybe this has been going on for longer, but I thought I wrote this down. One of the College of Public or Office of International and Cultural Affairs at Texas Tech University has a Mandela Fellows, what is called the Mandela Fellows program, where they host international students for a 6-week intensive leadership program. This is part of one of 28 locations across the country, and it's a real top tier sort of thing to be involved in and to host these fellows. And so every year there's like a big group of students that comes to town. They participate in this 6-week intensive leadership program. It's run by the State Department, the Federal State Department, and while they're here, they participate in all sorts of conferences and seminars, cultural touring. They create intensive projects with each other and team build. They do volunteering, a whole bunch of stuff. So at that 7-Eleven meeting, that was kind of the annual recognition of these students that are guests of our city and kind of take a peek behind the curtain, look at how Lubbock runs, interact with our people, and then take those experiences home with them wherever they're coming from in the world. And so every year we honor them by granting them an honorary citizenship, and that recognition was at City Hall on 7-Eleven. It's a nice thing to see and witness. I'm glad that our city is in some way contributing to, how the future leaders are going to be constructing our world and conceiving of how their own places would run or not run. So I thought it was something cool, if not pertinent to how the city runs, but still something cool to kind of take away. Okay, and then the other thing that was on that meeting that I thought would be worthy of bringing up is that one of the pieces of business on here was extending a letter of support, basically, for another 2 applications for the 4% non-competitive low-cost housing credit. This came up when we saw the news about the Ella apartments come up. We mentioned this on the show. This was a news issue. Yourself and some other advocates were present there, including Phyllis Gant and the NAACP, DSA. So when news about conditions that tenants in the Ella apartments came up, that was an advocacy effort. People might have seen that on the news. This also prompted the city council to kind of move and push forward bond and a tax abatement credit that would allow the property managers and owners of that to upgrade some of these facilities. It's a good fix, and it was a worthy way for the city to step in, but it's a little bit slow, so there's still gaps there. This is still an advocacy issue. Well, on the 7-Eleven council meeting, which is the one immediately subsequent, 2 other apartment complexes were also applying for this. That was the South Plains apartment and the Homestead apartments. Between them, they'll have about 200 units of low-income housing, and each one is getting a fairly substantive upgrade investment. These will bring a lot of the units to ADA standard compliance. And there was additionally the notion of the creation of a tenant support program. It sounds good. There could be some worthy things under there. It also sounds like it might be kind of lipstick on a pig. It might be kind of fancy wording for something that could be more substantive. And so I guess, there was a public hearing on it. The city council ultimately approved this measure. This is a good use of how this bond structure and equity backing is used in our city to make sure that we have a good supply of high quality, low income housing. It is a definite need and something that is worthy for us to invest in. But I do think that it also drew up the opportunity for us to give some flowers and kudos to the people who have been continuing to work advocacy on this effort, including our partners across the city, and also to remind our viewers and folks that a lot of times the oversight of issues comes in when it's that old adage, like squeaky wheels get grease. And so it takes people kind of bringing forward issues, having the courage to do that, have the time to do that, to get solutions to some of these problems to happen. And it seems like in some of these cases, some of the mechanisms of enforcement are starting to take hold here, and that's a good outcome. But as always, it also kind of reminds me of where there's a gap here, who has access to make these kinds of complaints, who has the time for that. We see their issues attended to very diligently, and other people's issues often kind of fall by the wayside. So, I would hope to see city leadership, city departments continuing to step up to the plate and take a more proactive role here, because that's a gap that needs filled. And of course, other advocacy organizations like our own, like other partners here. Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great when we always kind of add some low income housing to the city. Obviously, we're growing very fast. It's going to become an issue where a lot of folks may be pushed out of some areas entirely, or maybe pushed out of their home that they've lived in for a lot of years because they can't afford the area anymore or what have you. So it's always important to have housing for folks. I also like the fact that there's going to be this tenant program. I'd like to watch that and see what they do with that. I mean, obviously, another issue we've seen come up, like with the Ella apartments, is when you have these low income housing situations, obviously these people don't have a lot of means to advocate for themselves or to defend themselves in any way against any sort of predatory practices or wrongful evictions and things of this nature if they speak out, like what we've seen at the being reported at the Ella. And so I think it seems like a step in the right direction. Obviously, always glad to see some money coming in to help some of these apartment buildings, because a lot of times they are neglected and need a lot of work. And just because somebody is on the lower end of the financial scale, I don't believe that they deserve to be in substandard housing. And so they deserve AC in the summer. They deserve heat in the winter, and all the things that you would expect to have in your home for it to be clean and safe for your family. And so I think it's a step in the right direction. Obviously, we'll watch this and make sure that it gets carried out the way it's planned to be.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're so right. Having these be high quality housing and this is the thing that I think maybe a lot of people who oppose these kinds of things don't understand, but having them be high quality housing is like the building blocks for ultimately changing those circumstances around, getting people out of those circumstances in some cases, making sure that they're adequately able to provide in other cases. And so it really is an investment that pays off many times over as time goes on. So yeah, glad to see that outcome. Would like to see this not have to become a problem before there is adequate oversight and solutions. So yeah, something to continue to watch. Glad to see advocacy continuing on that. Okay, and then the other city council meeting that happened this month happened just yesterday. And this one is also fairly short and sweet, but did have, again, several different things that we thought was important to bring forward. As you know, maybe our audience who's watched us a long time knows this, but it's always important to bring up kind of the structure of this. There'll usually be some ceremonial items up front, if there are any such things. And then there's usually what's known as a consent agenda, and these are mostly the city conducting already discussed business, things that are non-controversial, things that they've already agreed to through the mechanisms that they're allowed to do that. And these will go on to a consent agenda. And then this is usually voted on as one item to kind of get the show on the road. So there's usually a consent agenda in almost any city council meeting. And this one, it had a couple of items that, unless you pull that record and look through them, you're not going to know what those items are on the consent agenda. And so if you're just like watching the meeting, so that's a lot of what the background work that we do here is, to pull these agendas and kind of look at these items. And so I thought there was a couple on here that were worthy of bringing to people's attention, because we've covered these types of things before, but several matters were related to public health. And one of them was a budget amendment that would allow them to continue to expand what they're terming in there as core capacity for city public health. And so I'm assuming this is, creating more staff there, maybe related to the construction of the new public health department at its new location. We have seen, because of inflationary pressures and these types of things, a lot of different budgetary adjustments go onto the consent agenda that have to do with, well, when the budget was developed, the quoted price for trucks was this, and now it's that. And so there's room in our budget to make up for those differentials. So whatever this is related to, because we're big supporters of the public health department and everything that they do, things that contribute so much to the city, I thought that was something interesting to see. Glad to see that. Additionally, something also under the public health department, and an area where our city is still a leader in the state, still building capacity, has work to do, but the city entering into several different agreements with entities to provide supportive services, particularly around substance abuse. So let's see, I had these written down. Centacor, Hub City Outreach, and Family Support Services of Amarillo, to provide these wraparound supportive services for people who might be experiencing homelessness, substance abuse, any kind of thing where they're in distress, so that they can get quickly connected to services and not fall even further behind, get the kind of health care support that they need. And so there were those two public health related items, and then also creating a formal letter of support for continued efforts to expand I-27 into the Ports to Plains corridor. So, folks that have followed transportation for a while know that, building a north-south interstate, connecting our interstate to that interstate system has been a long advocacy effort. There was some movement in that last year, different mandates without funding and approvals without funding. So different entities at the state, local, federal level continue to work on this, and this appears to be one of those. So those 3 items are in the consent agenda and kind of touched on pieces that we've, worked on before. And then right after that consent agenda, they got into reading through their board appointments. And Adam, I know this is a long advocacy effort of ours. I know you wanted to talk about this. There were a whole bunch there. It's really not worth going through which ones were up this cycle, who got appointed to them. There were some names that we recognize. There are some friends in there. There are people that we see on several of these who are kind of perennial and evergreen themselves. None of that is as important as telling the people what these are, why it's important. Take it away.
Yeah, so we've talked about city boards many times in a couple of ways. Obviously, when we go and engage with city boards, and the reason why we go and engage with city boards is because they actually do have a say in policy being created. And so not everything, but some things do go through a board who then makes recommendations to city council, who then votes on that. And the purpose of a board is to sort of do some of the upfront research and community outreach and whatever else needs to happen to come up with the policy idea for whatever it may be. And you've got boards for the airport, you've got boards for beautification, you've got all sorts of boards, right? There's all sorts of them. I think there's like 40, almost 50
Parks, the
boards.
library,
Yeah, there's so many, but what I'm trying to get at is this is one of those areas where just anybody can sign up, apply to be on a board, and if you get chosen, you then not only do you have a front seat to see how city policy processes work, but you also have a chance to have your voice in there and the voice of your community as well. So when you go in there on a board, you are representing a community. And so very important position to be in, and it's also a good way to get your foot in the door when it comes to trying to learn more about how the city operates. And I know a lot of times we get questions about how can I get involved, how can I start learning more about the city. This is one of those great ways to do that. And a good thing too about it is when those application periods come up, we always share those and we'll let you know when those happen. But when they come up and you apply, you don't have to keep applying unless the city calls you because they've had you in there for a while and they need you to reapply. But what will happen is if you don't get chosen in that round, they'll keep your application. And as things come up, they may give you a call and ask you, would you like to be on this board? And it may be the same one you applied for, or it may be something different, and they'll give you that option to be on there. And so, again, just very important. We're always advocating for people to get involved. And I think that a huge issue, a huge challenge that our communities are having is that we just don't know how these things work. And I speak from experience. When I first got involved in this in the summer of 2020, I had never registered to vote in my life. Many people know my story, but if you don't, I had never registered to vote in my life, had never voted, didn't vote to make Lubbock wet, didn't vote for Obama, didn't vote for any of it. I was so checked out, didn't even know who our mayor was. And so I get it. I get what it's like to be on the side where you don't know what's happening, and you oftentimes hear a lot of information, sometimes not accurate information, or sometimes you're missing information, and you can become very confused very quick about how political processes actually work. And it's really when you look at it and you go through some of these processes, or even if you were just to go look at some of the city council meetings online, you can see that it's really not that deep. It's pretty straightforward. It really does, though, rely on people's voices and the voices of the community. And so I just really want to say how important that is to try to be on these boards if you are one of those folks who would like to be involved and would like to step up to serve your community in that way. So, yeah.
Yeah, and almost any interest or concern that you have, that there is probably some public board or commission that kind of oversees or governs that. They they might be fully seated, but they need a pool of candidates because people move, people have circumstances come up, and so there is a accidental cycle to the seating on these boards. They do try as best they can to seat people from every district of the community onto them. But and then there's also the cycle of appointments. They have the terms have expirations, and so there's just kind of always some churn here, which is a good thing. It means that in an ideal circumstances, lots of people from our community, from all kinds of backgrounds, from all sorts of areas of our community, from all sorts of perspectives, could be seated on here, and that we would benefit greatly from that for reasons we'll probably talk about even a little bit more. So highly encourage people to throw their names in the ring here. If there is an area that interests you, you might think about attending a meeting, or at least pulling their agenda, or contacting the city secretary and seeing if somebody could speak to you from there. They'd likely be willing to. So yeah, glad you talked about that.
I
So
will
we
add
saw,
one
yeah,
thing before
go.
we move on. Just one thing. I have to throw this in there, and I don't know why it just popped up, but I have to throw this in there. If you get appointed on a board, please show up. You'll
Yeah,
probably have like it'll probably be like one meeting like every quarter or something. Depending on the board, you're not going to meet like a ton, right? Unless you're like on planning and zoning or something, you may meet monthly, but it's probably never going to be more than monthly. And usually it'll be like quarterly or even something longer out than that. All I'm trying to say is if you get appointed to one of these boards, and we've seen this happen many times, and it was so frustrating because we had high hopes for the person that was getting appointed, and we were like, yes, this person got appointed, and then they never showed up to the meeting, and that doesn't help anybody. That defeats the entire purpose of going to apply and have different people from the community on the board. That means when you don't show up, the voice of your community does not show up. And so just wanted to throw that piece in there. If you do get appointed now, I understand things happen. Nobody's going to hold it against you if you miss a meeting here and there, but just try to be there. So
right.
just wanted to throw that there.
Yeah, no. And then the other thing in this meeting that has, been a long ongoing advocacy effort. I hate to keep bringing this up, but it's the Hydra with the 7 heads. The city council did have a short public hearing and pass a resolution to have a subsequent joint public hearing with planning and zoning to discuss certain amendments to the just recently enacted, not yet implemented Unified Development Code. Not to get into, we don't want to open up our whole can of worms. Everybody knows where we stand on this. There's more interesting things to dig into on this issue in the very near future, a little bit later in the show, and subsequent shows. But you pull this list, it's a whole bunch of noise. There's a list of about 20 different things they want to look at on there. Well, first of all, they were like, actually, we need to amend this to say we need to take out the minor word from the resolution. So they, when they're going to do a resolution, they have to write that up. That has to be posted publicly. And so, the mayor's like, well, okay, I think we ought to take the minor part out of the amendments, in the section of the resolution that says, we said we wanted to make some minor amendments. And he's like, well, because could be some disagreement about what's a minor amendment. So if it's cool with all y'all, let's call this a Scrivener's error, which it so clearly isn't. And let's just pretend that we didn't say minor. And everybody's like, yeah, cool. Because again, they're probably sick of this too, even though I can't imagine why they didn't do hardly anything for it, most of them. Anyway, so they're like, great, good. Everybody likes this, passed. Now it goes on to the schedule. And it's supposed to be publicly posted, and probably it is. If I roll down to City Hall, it's like taped to a window over there instead of online or anywhere where any human being in the 21st century could normally find it. Anyway, point is, there's a public hearing that's going to be a joint session with planning and zoning to hear at least these amendments to the UDC, although not limited to these amendments to the UDC. And of course, there's amendments we would like to see in the UDC. We've talked about them so many times before. We're still hung up in the same position. This came up this week. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but this remains a thorn in our side. We wish that the city council would attend to some areas of this that so obviously need it, particularly amortization, but so many others. And also, it continues to be a little bit of an irritating thing that people who don't need as much access to this type of thing get unlimited access to it and get to bend every dimension of it to their every whim and will. And it becomes less and less protective of the city, of the long-term interests of the city, of the long-term interests of its people, and it becomes more and more protective of the long-term interests of developers. It just is what it is. You want to talk
Yeah,
about
I
that?
mean, yeah, I'm assuming, and I don't know, did they read out the list of the 20 things? Was it anything?
It's online, and it's this, that, and the other. And they probably want to whine. I know they want to whine about the those buffer yards. Oh, everybody loves whining about those ad infinitum. So there's probably something in there in the landscaping requirements, or the length of it, or the width of it, or whatever. There's something about some signs in there. There was nothing in there that, like, to me indicated, oh, maybe they're going to talk about our thing that the Planning and Zoning Commission in fact recommended they do, and us and other advocates have been doing for more than 2 years, even though they're just like, oh, this is the first time hearing about it. No, it isn't. And people long before us have been talking about, well before the existence of Lubbock Compact, well before any of us were involved in this. This is not a surprise to anybody that we need resolution to industrial zoning some way,
Okay,
somehow.
well,
Anyway.
yeah, I mean that's fine. It's probably a lot of miscellaneous things that I know that some developers and builders brought up the buffer yards, and so I'm with you. It's probably some
There
things
is a
like
thing
that.
about accessory dwelling
Yeah,
units in there. There are some, maybe we'll see some improvements, blah, 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 blah.
yeah. So I mean, I'm sure it's very minor things, but just for really quick, so for people who aren't really following here, the UDC is the Unified Development Code, which is putting Lubbock's zoning laws all into one book, if you will. Obviously there's some issues with industrial sites right next to neighborhoods, particularly in the northeast quadrant of the city. This is something we advocate for and continue to advocate for something to be addressed. Amortization is a tool that can be used to address that we've been advocating for. That's not being brought up. I'm with you, Josh. I don't think they're going to bring that up. It has been a little disappointing to see, I guess, the willingness of council. I mean, I understand that the developer's voice obviously needs to be heard on this. This is a huge impact to their business. We're not saying that, they shouldn't have any say whatsoever. I do worry about an outsized influence. And there are some things that we in particular are not really crazy about. One of those being that essentially, once this thing is enacted, a developer could put a huge building in the middle of any neighborhood across the city, essentially, whether that fits there or not. And it will be on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis to make that determination if it fits there or not. But I can foresee lots and lots of rounds of communities coming out up in arms about some development that's going to be 8 stories next to single family homes that have been there for decades and decades, as we're seeing with certain developments that we've talked about here on the show. That's problematic to me. We're not anti-business, we're not anti-housing or anti-student housing or anti any sort of housing, but we need to be responsible with how we build out our city. And we feel that developers or not, business owners or not, that we should all be able to be good neighbors and to be considerate about our neighbors and consider what impact you're having on the place that you're putting something. I know that builders and developers can do whatever they want. I know it's their money, it's their materials, it's their buildings, but there's something to be said for empathy is all I'm saying. And if just a word to developers, if you would like to have less headaches and less stress every single time you want to do something, I would implore you and encourage you to make the first step in your process, the very first step. Once you have your idea and you've written it down and you've got the business plan or you got whatever you need, before you kick off the whole official proceedings of putting that in motion, it would behoove you and it would make it a lot less stressful for you and a lot better for you if you were to engage with the community you're moving into first. That's all we've been saying this entire time. The whole thing that happens is that doesn't happen. This stuff pops up seemingly out of nowhere for the neighborhood, and they've got 2 weeks to nothing to mobilize to really figure out what's going on, figure out how it happened, and mobilize to try to save their neighborhood. And I know for some of these developers, it may be hard for you to understand them in their position, but try to think about them in their position. Try to think that for the 30 years you've had this home, you've been able to go out and enjoy your garden in your backyard. It's nice. You listen to the birds, you water the plants, yada, yada, yada. Next morning, you got an 8-story building across the alley. Now you've got neighbors you didn't expect peering down into your yard now. The shade has completely destroyed whatever you had going with your garden because you probably had it set up for whatever lighting situation you had, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We need to think about these things. And that's all I'm saying.
Right.
If you front loaded that, if you front
Right.
load
No.
the support for your thing, it would be so much easier.
And that's the most generous position, because we cannot forget that there is no business in town that has the potential to cost the city money up front except development. Every single other business endeavor and venture that the city that can be engaged in the city immediately begins to make the city money from the very for the word go. Development is the only thing that has the potential to front load costs to the city. So you can't act all hurt when the city wants to draw protections and boundaries and building standards and all these things that help protect our mutual investment, that help the cohesion between these activities that happen and not cause a bunch of turmoil. And so the more that they want permission to do whatever they want to do, the more we need those strong protections and boundaries and codes and standards in there. The more that they are willing to engage in an open-handed and upfront loaded process, then yeah, the more that this can be whittled down, and because that becomes like a pattern of practice. But what we've seen is everything whittled down and kind of enacted in their favor, and they do still want to do whatever they want to do wherever they want to do. And so yeah, it's just out of whack. It needs to be brought. There's so many things about this that just need to be brought within a sustainable model, a more inclusive model. And so yeah, I think you stated it pretty well, honestly. Okay, so there was that thing about the UDC, and then the other thing that came up that is connected to forward-looking things, as well as things we've covered on the show, is that the city did also mention, well, there's 2 different matters coming up in the Planning and Zoning Committee tomorrow. So the Planning and Zoning Committee often comes up on the show. We were just talking about city boards. This is one of them. This is one of the busier ones. A lot of different issues come before them, particularly where it relates to zoning and development and housing and all kinds of planning, these kinds of things that our show covers in depth. And so 2 different ones that are coming before the commission tomorrow that we have previously covered on the show. So we want to make sure to uplift that and spotlight that. And to your point about these housing developments, the first one is the planned student housing complex now in Overton. This is a different one that was earlier in the year in Tech Terrace. This one is known as, or is called Park Hill. And it's item 4.1.1 on tomorrow's agenda. We know residents of South Overton, of Texas Tech, some of the usual suspects, some of the people that were originally advocating on this issue are engaged in the same issue. And so it comes up for its first meeting before Planning and Zoning tomorrow, 6 p.m. at City Hall. I know will be there in some form or another. Do you want to talk about that one separately, or do you want me to hit both of these issues that are on here?
No, go ahead.
Okay, and then the other issue that's on there that we've been following closely is that, as you well know, the Dunbar-Manhattan Heights and the Parkway, or sorry, the Jackson-Mahon neighborhood plans have gone through their whole planning cycle. They're completed and done. We were able to get to some of the celebration parties this past week. It was really a lot of fun. It was great to see people. Had a good hamburger. Music was good. Anyway, those completed plans are now going before the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is the first step in their adoption. And so they will be presented to Planning and Zoning also tomorrow. This is item 6.1. If approved out of here, they'll go to City Council, and then they'll be adopted, and then an implementation plan will go into effect for those. So those two items also came up on the City Council meeting, coming up on that Planning and Zoning Commission meeting tomorrow, 6 p.m. at City Hall. Anybody that is interested in either of these would certainly be encouraged to attend.
Yeah, if again, as we were talking about developments that may or may not fit in a certain neighborhood, that's the deal with this apartment building, this Park Hill building that's being discussed at the Planning and Zoning meeting. So if you would like to stand with the neighborhood on that, or if you have thoughts on that, you can definitely attend that meeting, or you can email your thoughts in on that. So I would encourage folks, especially if you live in the South Overton area, it does hold a little more weight, not necessarily, but it does definitely hold a little more weight if you live in the area. And so obviously the people who live right across the street, et cetera, are gonna, their opinions are gonna be held a little higher as well. So if you're from that area, or if you just stand with folks in that area, you can either show up and speak or just show up and be in solidarity with those folks. Concerning the neighborhood plans, there's some things that we're looking for in here. There may be some plans to down zone some of the industrial areas. I know that this is something that the consultant brought up. And so just a real quick super simplistic lesson on zoning. So every type of zoning in our city, meaning what you can build in a place or what you can put in a place or how it can look or whatever, that's what zoning laws are. You have each kind of category has its name. So you've got stuff for retail, for industrial, for residential, etc. Right? Pretty straightforward. Well, underneath each of those categories, there's various things, but when it comes to industrial zoning, and these are the industrial sites right across the street from neighborhoods that we've discussed many, many times, there is a way to at least protect the neighborhood in the meantime and set things up for a later time when maybe those facilities won't be there at all. And so what this is right now, those industrial zoning sites are set to industrial. So if one of those buildings moves, some other business owner could come the very next day and say, I'm going to put another industrial use there right across the street from these houses, even though they don't want it, because it's in the law. There is a type of zoning called transitional, and transitional is a specific type of zoning used for this purpose. So that way, if they zone all of those things transitional, it changes nothing for the business because they can still continue to operate until they are out of business or unless they lose over 70% of their building in a natural disaster. Outside of those two things, they can operate forever there. And again, if the zoning's not changed, they can move, somebody else could come in. If the zoning is changed to transitional, and that business does go out of business, or it does get destroyed more than 70% by a natural disaster, because it's zoned transitional, planning and zoning and city council in the future are pretty much not likely at all to issue any variances for somebody to put something industrial there. So it's a safeguard. It doesn't necessarily change anything right now, but this is one of those steps that we've talked about that are low lifts for the council. There's a lot of thoughts on amortization. We're sure that those business owners and those landowners are going to have issues with that. But when you talk about changing it from industrial to transitional, It means nothing in the meantime. They're still able to operate there forever until they move. But you're showing the neighborhood we're taking steps to help you out here to try to change outcomes as we can, right? And so I would encourage the council and planning and zoning to push that through and just show these communities that you're showing them that you care, showing them that you are concerned about the concerns they've been bringing up since before I've been alive in our neighborhoods. And so I just think that that was a big one to highlight and just wanted to kind of give folks a little context there.
No, I'm glad you did, and it kind of took, we should skip past my editorial, in all of this because it really captures it very well. But in this area, in some areas of like the city services and whatnot, we like to give our people flowers. Plenty of things go well. Plenty of things are moving along as you would expect in our city. We are not untoward critics of leadership or anything like that. But in some ways, it makes it even more irritating that some things cannot move forward, don't move forward, especially when we have so many different opportunities. There's so many different funding pieces on the table to fix these kinds of things. There's so many different legal mechanisms and opportunities and different advocacy efforts that have been put forward. And so it gets really frustrating that, now is the time for us to make these investments that are going to pay off for generations, for hundreds of years. If we, the same way that we see other things pay off many times past when they were first conceived of, it was thought like, that's totally crazy. The loop, for instance, that was the totally harebrained idea. Now it continues to serve Lubbock's traffic needs in a way that makes it one of the easiest places to move around in the whole country. So we could be doing more stuff like that. I wish we would. I wish we had the kind of vision for that. Okay. Adam, hit that community resource spotlight, dude.
Okay. So community resource spotlight, it is still summer for just a little bit. And if you're looking for some things to do around Lubbock, we are doing a little bit different resource spotlight. This is 5 free things to do here in Lubbock. And I know you can go to the movies and you can go to one of the seemingly millions of restaurants that we have or what have you. There's all sorts of things. I'm a big advocate for taking especially kids to have some different experiences that they normally don't have. And so these lists of things are not only good for kids and for opening up their worldview and expanding their knowledge of the world around them and some cool things about history and all those kind of things. It's also good for us to know these things about our city. And also it's pretty fun sometimes to go to these places that are right here in the city all the time. And so these are 5 free things, by the way, to do here in Lubbock. So one is the National Ranching Heritage Center, which of course is a 19-acre museum and national park on Texas Tech campus. And it has ranch buildings as old as the 18th century. That's pretty much from the beginning of when this was started to become a city out here. So some cool history to learn about there. You've got Prairie Dogtown, which of course is located in McKenzie, the main city park. It's a wildlife attraction that has prairie dogs, and it's got some viewing areas there so that you can hang out with the family and look at the prairie dogs and all of that. Then you've got Buddy Holly statue in the West Texas Hall of Fame, really cool attraction located just across Buddy Holly Center, and have benches and gardens there. It's a nice place to hang out. You've got the Museum of Texas Tech University, really cool place. It's actually an entire museum complex, obviously inside campus over off of 4th Street, with over 8 million objects in its collection. For those who aren't aware, Lubbock, our area, has a long and deep history. As long as there's been human beings on this continent that we sit in now, they have come through this area. And that brings us to our last one, which is the Lubbock Lake Landmark. The reason why human beings have always traveled through this area is because Lubbock Lake Landmark used to actually be called Long Lake. And if you follow the canyon systems from all over the continent, they will all converge at some point right here at the Lubbock Lake landmark. And that's why for the entire time, at least 12,000, probably more like 18 to 20,000 years that we can confirm there have been human beings on this continent. They've come through this area. And so you can go check out Lubbock Lake Landmark. There is an actual museum part to it. It's not huge, but it has a lot of the history and kind of what has taken place here, the animals, the types of animals that used to live here that a lot of people don't know about. And it's got some cool statues around the property. They've got walks all the time, but there is a trail that you can just walk anytime and go around and see some of the natural foliage that grows here. They've got the natural wildflowers growing out there. It's a nature preserve. So you can still see horny toads out there and they're not going to be scared of you. They'll let you take a picture. There's rabbits all over the place because those are naturally here in Lubbock. Lots of birds. If you're a bird watching person, you'll see all sorts of animals and things, huge jackrabbits that you can see sometimes if they're not too scared to pop up. And so really cool place to visit. These are 5 free things to do here in Lubbock. And one thing I will add about Lubbock Lake Landmark, I don't know if schools still do this. The first time I got exposed to the Lubbock Lake Landmark, I was at Rush Elementary, where I started out my young school life. And they took us out there one time. And it's just always made a huge impression on me since that time. But I haven't really heard of or seen schools taking groups of kids out to the Lubbock Lake Landmark or to some of these places. And I think it's a shame. I think that field trips should start to be renewed and start to be more of a thing. I know funding's a lot of problems, but parents, join those PTAs and send these kids to some of these cool places so that they can have some different experiences and expand their minds. So that's my spiel on our 5 free things to do here in Lubbock.
I love everything on that list, and I'm always impressed when I go there, and I'm always re-impressed when I go there. Like, some of these I kind of hit on an annual basis. Some, like the Texas Tech Museum, I'm there. They have cycling collections all the time. I love their permanent collection. No matter how many times I see it, I love it. Okay, just a couple of other things to like toss out here at the end, kind of tease up some of the shows. We, of course, a lot of our viewers will have seen this. Maybe you didn't. So let us, tell you that some of our friends in the neighborhoods, folks in an assortment of community advocates, especially in communities around North and East Lubbock, in connection with Legal Aid of Northwest Texas, a group that continues to do fantastic legal supportive work, both in civil dimensions, but also civil rights dimensions, announced that they had filed a formal complaint, civil rights complaint, this week on behalf of residents of the North and East Lubbock neighborhoods, with the Housing and Urban Development Department, the Federal Justice Department, and the Treasury Department. And their complaint alleges discriminatory zoning practices. This is what we were just talking about. This is what we've been talking about. And this is what we will be talking about in a couple of weeks. We've invited some of those advocates to come and talk on the show about this. In so many ways, these folks are kind of our missing puzzle piece. They are so frequently working in the legal area, where our organization is working in the political area of these same sorts of things, many of which have to do with injustices, civil rights disparities, these kinds of issues. And so I know I was super excited to see this complaint hit. I know I experienced a little bit of schadenfreude because this is precisely what we warned the city could be coming down the pipeline for them, and to resolve issues is to head off these kinds of problems as if they weren't just the right thing to do. And I know that we're going to be talking about this in great detail, but something I haven't had a chance to talk to you about yet is that organizations, community members can submit support letters for these complaints to the same said departments. Anybody can just write up a letter and send it in. I know we're going to be drafting one on behalf of our organization, and I know we'll be excited to talk about this a little bit more on our August 8th show. Adam, do you want to give some other thoughts here? I know we've talked about this on the show already, but
Yeah, I know a lot of times Lubbock Compact gets looked at like, we like to cause trouble or, whatever. The thing about us is this: our advocacy efforts are not only to help communities, it's also to help the city. The overall goal that we have when it concerns relations with the city council and city boards, etc. Our goal is to bridge the gap between the communities and the council and local policymakers so that trust can be rebuilt and so that lines of communication can be strengthened between those two groups of people so that it's better for both sides, so that the city's not constantly being railed against or constantly being called out for things, and also so that the community is not constantly frustrated or constantly dealing with things that sometimes are public health issues that don't get addressed. And so this is a very serious business, and it's not just to make noise or to rattle the cage or rock the boat or whatever you want to say. There's a method to our madness here, and the motive behind it is helping the overall city, which includes council. And so we've said this on the show many times before. I don't know if I've said it in a while, so I'll say it again. Our preference is to not have to call out city council and not have to say these types of things. This is not what we look forward to doing. We hate it every single time that we have to do some advocacy on something that's obviously the right thing to do. It's frustrating. It takes a lot of our time. Nobody pays us for this. It takes a lot of our time, a lot of our energy, a lot of mental exhaustion and fatigue and all sorts of things to get these things done and to present these things to council. And so we don't do all of that for nothing. And so our view is we don't like to see the city get sued or to see complaints against them. That's the last thing we want to see. But if you don't do the right thing over and over and over again, there are consequences to that. And we need our public policy makers to understand that. That should be our preference, that they know that there's accountability there, that they know that if they don't do these things on behalf of the citizens who've been asking them for literal decades, I can't even tell you how many councils have passed where they've dropped the ball on this. And so we don't applaud this. We don't celebrate this in that sense. The reason why it does get us excited is because it means that things are moving down the road. What's going to happen from here? We're not sure. We're not a part of that complaint. We didn't sign off on that complaint. We will be sending a letter of support because we believe the same thing we believed all along. These industrial sites don't need to be right across the street from houses. And if you don't care about that, I feel like you don't have empathy for your fellow human beings. And just because you don't live next to one of them, it doesn't mean it doesn't affect somebody else that has a family like you do, who have kids like you do, who have dreams and aspirations like you do. And the last thing I'll say to sum this up, because we've seen a lot of the chatter on the comments under news sections and things of this nature, and there's some always the same sort of thing that comes up. Oh, well, we live in West Texas. These people are complaining about the air. It's dusty here in West Texas. Yes and no. Yes, it's dusty here in the city. No, that's not what we're talking about. None of us are, none of us are dunces here.
Right.
We understand the difference between a haboob or regular old dusty Lubbock versus a cottonseed oil plant right across the street that leaves oily film on your car and all over everything. It's not the same as a concrete batch plant that has plumes of dust that go up all over the place and trucks in and out that cause all this dust to be all over everything. And so to folks to say, oh, well, you can see the air. Yes, you can see it. Depending on what time of day it is or what's happening at those facilities, you can absolutely see it in the air. And you can also smell things like the cattle yard that's not too far from neighborhoods. There's all sorts of things that are not the regular old dust of Lubbock. I'd like to just kind of nip that in the bud. And that's my spiel on it. We're going to continue to advocate on this because none of you would want to live with industrial sites across the street from your family and your home, depressing your property values, making it to where nobody wants to develop in your area, and causing real health problems for your family. You would not want that. And those of us that come from those neighborhoods don't want that for our families either. And we've dealt with it for decades and decades and decades, and we're tired of it. And so if you want to feel some sort of way about it, I'm sorry for you. We're going to keep advocating for this. And I'm glad to see some things moving along. It's unfortunate that this had to happen. I said that in a post. I shared this and I said, it's a shame. That's how I feel about it. It's a shame. We should not even be here. These are all adults, intelligent adults, who are put in positions of power that could easily, with a stroke of a pen, change some of these things and literally improve the quality of life for citizens that live in our community. And so that's my rant. I'm stepping off the soapbox. We can close out the show.
I know. And if you were in that position, you'd want some people to have your back, and you'd want them to not be endlessly patient with the issue and like throwing a parade for people that ain't done nothing to fix it. So now I'm done with my rant. Okay, last bit here is that we want to talk, we've had these guests on the show, our good friends over at Freedom Act. This thing is getting ready to go live. Speaking of the city focusing its efforts on things that matter and otherwise not focusing on things that waste time and otherwise bother people, the petition at Freedom Act is going live on August 18th. I know they're having lots of meetings for volunteers and training up people. This is getting ready to hit the streets, and this is public policy stuff that we love to see. And there's sponsorship opportunities for folks that want to give to that effort. As you've been saying, these types of things, all of this takes resources, and we're so grateful for anybody that can contribute those resources to making sure that the types of campaigns, advocates, organizations, and the type of infrastructure that helps protect our people is there and available. So anything else about that, Adam?
No, yeah, just go to freedomactlubbock.org. You can find all the information about that. You can sign up to volunteer. I know that a lot of hands are needed in the effort, so please sign up to volunteer. Try to make the volunteer meeting if you can, or reach out. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Visit freedomactlubbock.org.
Cool. Well, we're right on the nose.
All right, it is 8 p.m. and we made it on time. And so thank you everybody for tuning in. Please share the show far and wide. We're going to start making some efforts to share the show a little more, also to get people a little more prepared, maybe put out a lineup that we're having. That way you can kind of mark your calendar. So just stay tuned. We're going to continue the show. We're going to continue to expand the show. We're starting to finally get our YouTube channel up there, so you'll be able to catch us on some other platforms. We're also going to start uploading the audio on a regular basis like we used to do, and so we're going to continue to expand. And if you would just share the show and let your friends know about it. This is the only media source where you're going to get two things here in Lubbock. You're going to get city updates that you're not going to get otherwise, and also lots of information about how those processes work and how you can be involved. And you're also going to get stories and guests that are probably not going to be welcomed or booked on other shows that you may want to hear from and that have things to say. And so if you are one of those people, you've got some things to say, you've got a cool organization, you've got some things going on, never hesitate to reach out to us. We're always looking for guests for the show. And that's it. This is the point where I remind you to join your neighborhood association. Another great way, low entry way to start getting involved in your community. And that's why I say it every single time. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you right back here on August 9th. See y'all later.
Bye, buddy.